All right, so now I move to actual relativism. And really, the appeal is the tolerance thing that I talked about last time. One of the other appeals of both types, both individual relativism and cultural relativism, one of the appeals is also going to be one of the weaknesses. And we'll see that kind of throughout, and we've already seen that the strengths frequently are the same things as the weaknesses. In individual relativism, the individual is never wrong, right? Because the individual decides for themselves what they value and what their ethical system is. And so they're always right, which again prevents other people from imposing their values, right? So I really like the example used here of the cutting in line, right? The rest of the people in line, if they're individual relativists, can't tell that guy, hey, get to the back of the line. Because as individual relativists, right, we have to be accepting of everyone else's ethical theory as well. And this guy's ethical theory just happens to not include things like waiting in lines. And so everyone else has to accept that because no one is incorrect, no one is wrong. If we're speaking culturally, then no culture is ever incorrect. So in that case, this gentleman may be out of line. See what I did there? Because he's out of, you know what I mean? So he's in line, but by being in line, he's out of line ethically from a cultural perspective, because this particular culture is one that adheres to lines and remaining in them and waiting your turn and so on and so forth, that is a value of this particular culture that this individual then is combating and going against, which is one of the ways in which cultural relativism thinks itself is superior or better, a better prescription than individual relativism, because it does prevent everyone from doing whatever they want. And so again, this individual relativism then, if everyone's deciding for themselves, that looks very similar to nihilism, where everyone does their own thing because ethics is stupid, why bother? And so as Bernard and Rayleigh say, perhaps relativism, especially the individual type, gives us something very close to no morality at all, in much the same way that nihilism does. Because it's up to the individual. There's no check or balance of any type anywhere else. That we really do live with a ring of Gyges, complete freedom. I'm an individual relativist, so are you, so what's true for me is true for me, what's true for you is true for you. Never any disagreements occur, so it would seem, with regards to ethics. But as the line example points out, it may actually lead to more conflict. So the cultural relativist comes along and says, hey, we have an improvement here. How about instead of each individual determining what's ethical and what's not, what if each culture or society determines instead? It still prevents the imposition thing because it disallows a particular culture from telling another culture that what they're doing is unethical, because each culture decides for themselves. So now it's no culture that's wrong or incorrect with regards to morality, and it allows that culture then to comment upon individuals who are trying to do their own thing. It prevents nihilism. It prevents the ring of Gyges. We're not actually free completely and totally to do whatever it is that we want. The culture decides what we can and should do. Notice the similarities here with cultural relativism and the common view understanding that Plato talks about. Remember, the common view wants to say that ethics and the law are one and the same thing. The law is a way for the culture to let everyone else know this is what this culture stands for. These are the values of this particular society. You can either get on board or get out. Find a different society or a different culture that more closely adheres to your individual beliefs and values, if you so choose. That raises other problems. Right? Problems such as the ones that Bernard and Rayleigh point out. From a cultural relativistic perspective, then, we can never have something like moral reform. We can never progress as a culture or as a society. We may change if the majority opinion changes, because of course it's the majority that will always decide for a particular culture or society the rules, the laws, the norms, the ethics, the values, which notices another potential weakness. The minority never gets heard. They continue to remain voiceless because they're never the majority, numerically speaking. There's never enough of them to change the cultural attitudes and values and so on and so forth. But furthermore, reform isn't possible because there's no objective standard that we're getting closer to. That's what progress is getting closer to some type of objective truth or objective standard. If you get rid of that, as I mentioned last time with regards to getting rid of truth, you're therefore getting rid of knowledge, and all you're left with is belief. Everyone's beliefs are equal, or every culture's beliefs are equal. And so if a culture does change its mind about something with regards to ethics, that's all it is a change. It's not progress. It's not getting better with regards to ethics. It's just different with regards to ethics. And notice the same thing that prevents one culture from imposing or speaking out against another culture, because all cultures just do what that particular culture does, also prevents a culture of today, for instance, from looking backwards and saying something about a culture of the past. That to say that that culture was unethical is not true cultural relativism, because that culture of the past is a culture just like a culture on the other side of the world right now. A culture that had its own standards, its own norms, its own values, its own ethics, and we can't comment upon that either. That if that culture decided that that's what was ethical for them, then so be it. That was ethical for them. We have a different idea now, but it's not a better idea. It's not a more moral idea. It's just different. It's just change, not progress. Furthermore, it prevents particular individuals from speaking out against the culture, because by speaking out, they're necessarily rabble-rousers, causing trouble. By commenting that a culture is incorrect, you're already resorting back to some type of individual relativism, the cultural relativist would say, right? That, well, that's just your belief, but that belief and value doesn't fit this particular culture, probably breaks the rules and the laws of a culture. And so by speaking out against the culture, you are necessarily, from a cultural relativistic perspective, unethical. It's why some people get thrown in jail. Nelson Mandela, for instance, was in jail. Why? Because he was speaking out against the government of South Africa at the time. In a cultural relativistic perspective, he's the one being unethical, because that culture decides what's right for that culture, and he was speaking out against it. Dr. Reverend Martin Luther King Jr., same thing. The culture had decided something, and he's trying to speak out against that culture. How non-relativistic of him. Or how very individually relativistic of him. So those are problems, but really, Dr. Shrapi at least thinks that the biggest problem is the one that Berner and Rayleigh talk about last in the cultural relativism chapter. How many societies and cultures are you actually a member of? In my Intro to Philosophy class, one of the journals I have them do, I'm not going to make you guys do it, but I do want you to stop and think for a few moments, is I want you to think about who are you, right? The great philosophical question, who are you? And as you're thinking about who you are, typically the way people go about describing this is by giving a list of descriptors. By saying, I'm male or female or non-binary, I'm white or black or some other race, or my ethnicity, right? I'm Salvadorian or Ghanaian or from Burkina Faso or from the Philippines, or I wear glasses or I don't wear glasses. I'm a parent or I'm not a parent. I'm a sibling or I'm an only child. I am a United Statesian. I am 21st century. I am a religious believer, not a religious believer. Whatever descriptions you give about you, you're the only one who fits all of those descriptions. That's just you. But there are other individuals who fit each of the descriptors, individually speaking. And to what extent then is each of those descriptors a particular culture or a particular society that you happen to belong to, that you identify with, that you have placed in your list of who you are? What happens then if these cultures or these societies conflict with regards to what's ethical and what's not? What if the glasses wearers think that this particular thing is ethical, yet fathers, for whatever reason, disagree? Well, now I'm stuck because I'm a member of both cultures. How do I determine which culture I should follow? And so here's where the individual relativist says, aha, see, we got you, cultural relativists. That ultimately who decides is the individual. The individual is the one that decides which culture to follow. So it's not really the culture determining it at all, it's the individual. Because what is a culture in a society anyway but something made up of individuals? So cultural relativism then really becomes individual relativism. You just happen to have a whole bunch of individuals who happen to agree about certain things, but perhaps disagree about other things, coming together. Now I wonder, this is just Shroppy wondering at this point, I wonder if the order of your descriptors matters. Which is to say that whichever descriptor you put first in the who am I is the one that you most closely identify with. The one that, if there are conflicts with the other groups in your list, you're usually going to fall back on that first one. That's the culture that you most closely align yourself with, the culture that you most closely identify yourself with, that's the one that you're going to adhere to. But again, that's an individual decision, not a cultural decision. A culture is made up of individuals. So hold on a second here. Let's run this line of thinking. So cultural relativism says, look, we have a check and a balance upon individuals doing whatever they want. Cultural relativism, the culture decides. But a culture is composed of individuals. And all individuals are members of multiple societies and cultures. So if these cultures disagree, it's the individual ultimately that decides what's ethical and what's not. If it's the individual that decides based upon their own criteria and what it is that they value, then hold on a second, doesn't that look very much like nihilism? And so for my chart from last time, the question marks in the reason and feeling or results or intention, so on and so forth, those question marks, again, practically speaking, end up looking very much like the X's. The getting rid of ethics altogether. This gentleman cutting in line is an individual relativist, but his actions from everyone else's perspective look very much like he doesn't value anything at all. He has no ethics at all. He's perhaps a moral nihilist instead because he's paying no attention to the rest of us. We are probably all cultural relativists. There is line etiquette that he should be following. But he, the individual, is not a part of that culture. He says, no, my friends. I understand that you value these things, and I imagine if I valued them, I'd be pretty upset too. However, I don't. My values are different. I'm an individual relativist. And you can't tell me I'm wrong. What's true for me is true for me. What's true for you is true for you. What I choose to believe, I choose to believe. What you choose to believe, that you choose to believe. What I value, I value. What you value, you value. These are different things. But that should not necessarily lead to conflict because, again, of course, we have things like tolerance. You should tolerate and accept that I just happen to have values different than you. You should not have a problem with me cutting in line. I've explained myself. I've given the justification for why it's okay, given my ethical standards, for me to cut in line. I'm not going to apologize for my beliefs and the things that I value. I may be sorry about the circumstances that you find yourself in because I understand that you value those things. But quite frankly, that's a you problem, not a me problem. Conflict averted, right? Because I should be tolerant of the guy who doesn't value what I value. And he's explained himself. And so I therefore should accept that, right? Like, okay, my fault. I apologize, right? I, the one who got cut in front of, should be the one apologizing. I apologize, sir. I did not realize that your value system was different than mine, and I do not want to impose. So please, go ahead. Thank you for explaining to me. Furthermore, with regards to cultural relativism and individual relativism, I'm wondering with the cultural relativism, is it the case that individuals who already have similar beliefs come together to form the culture? Or is the culture pre-established and that then influences the particular individual beliefs within the culture? And I'm sort of laying the groundwork here with that particular question, because where I want to go next after the relativism, which could be an anything goes, or a critical thinking, depending upon how you're viewing these relativisms. One way to combat the relativisms could be to go back to the Garden of Eden stage and have something like God and ethics be one and the same thing, which will be the next chapter that we'll cover. Let me see what chapter that one is. God and ethics, or ethics and religion, I forget what it's called, which will also have its own problems. We will see. Everything we talk about in here is going to have its own problems. It's going to be strong and weak. Ethics and Religion is chapter 13, so for next time, read chapter 13. Which comes first, right? The individual or the culture? And that may dictate some other things as well. And so we've reached the point now where we've covered enough stuff that you should, every time you read something new or exposed to something new, you should be thinking of it within the context of all the other stuff we've talked about. We've got Plato's common view understanding out there. We've got nihilism out there. We now have individual relativism out there. We have cultural relativism out there. Right? This cultural relativism, societal relativism, again, as I mentioned last time with regards to the tolerance thing, there's a strength there too. Right? We don't want to too quickly dismiss all of these things. However, like I mentioned last time, right, that particular author says, look, understanding people is the way to respect them. Engaging in true dialogue and discussion and conversation with them, that's how you respect other folks and their beliefs and their values. That does not mean that you must necessarily accept their beliefs and their values. That it seems to be the case that we actually do judge other folks and judge other cultures, right? If there's a culture out there that's committing genocide, the rest of the world, if they're remaining silent and doing nothing about it, many of us would be like, whoa, hold on a second here. Like, there may be some things that we can be culturally relativistic about, but mass murder doesn't seem to be something anybody should be okay with. There should be an ethical standard here which dismisses mass murder, even if that particular culture chooses to do it. We shouldn't just be okay with it. Or if a particular culture engages in repression and oppression, whoa, hold on. Like, this seems to be a bit different. And so, in light of the strengths and the weaknesses of cultural relativism, one of the things we need to think about, and by we I mean really you, need to be thinking about is, okay, are there lines to be drawn, right? Are there some things that we're okay with cultural relativism about? Like the food you choose to eat, fine. You know, you want to eat dogs and cats, fine. You want to eat cows and chickens and pigs, okay, that's cool, right? Different, but neither of those is unethical, right? It's just cultural differences. And cultural differences may be different than differing cultural values. Okay? So those things we may be okay with, but other things we're not. And why are we not okay with those other things? Because there seems to be some objective standard that we want to appeal to. That this pure subjectivism thing maybe practically doesn't really work very well. And maybe theoretically isn't as great as it sounds either. Because we do want to say, whoa, that thing is wrong. Right? Whoa, Dr. Shrapi, slamming the door in your daughter's face, like that's not okay, man. That's wrong. You shouldn't do that. She's 5. That's not okay. Hey, guy cutting in line, that's not okay. The rest of us have been waiting here. We understand that you don't value that, but you should. Not just because we believe it to be true, but because it actually is true. It actually is something that should be valued. Holding doors open for folks is something that should be valued, especially when they're, little children. Now, Dr. Shrapi may justify by saying, look, I'm attempting to empower my 5-year-old daughter such that she doesn't need doors open for her. She can open her own door. How dare you impose your parenting beliefs upon me? How dare you tell me how best to raise a strong, independent woman who doesn't need doors opened, who can do it her doggone self? And so where are these lines then? If there are lines to be drawn. If we're okay with some relativistic things and other not relativistic things, where's that line? Is it an objective line? And again, where we're going from here is going to be sort of moving out of subjectivism and into more objective theories. And so I start this class with kind of the more gray and nebulous theories. I start with the theories that are sort of in some ways anti-ethics, ethical theories. Because the issues that they raise have to be taken seriously. And they have to be taken seriously before we can start looking at, black and white theories, or theories that want to do with ethical calculus, or any of these other more well-known theories that get thrown out there in popular culture and so forth. And those are important, and we're getting there. But as Nietzsche said, right, the very idea that morality is necessarily, inherently, fundamentally good has to be questioned first. And we have to establish some type of criteria first. Then, when we go look at these theories, then we will find theories that more closely adhere to that criteria and ones that don't. Relativism, like the and boths for all the decisions that I brought up, results and intention, so on and so forth, and both sounds great. Relativism sounds like it should be right, like you just let everybody be, man. You just let everybody be. Doesn't that look a whole lot like everybody's got the ring of Gyges? Complete freedom. And is that a good thing or a bad thing? The individual relativist would say good thing. The cultural relativist would say bad thing. The cultural relativist has the same concern that Plato does. What would most people do with that kind of power and that kind of freedom? Scary stuff. Therefore, there are laws and rules and cultural norms and cultural values that come in to prevent that. The individual relativist, whoa, pretty oppressive, man. Well, the rules and laws and norms and values and stuff, like, can't we all just disagree and get along? Sounds tolerant until that tolerance seems to impose anything, even the notion of tolerance itself. There's been a really bad history of impositions in the world and in each culture, in each society. And so relativism is sort of a reaction against that. But does it go too far, the opposite direction? Can we find some middle ground somewhere? So it's kind of a short one today because I kind of want you to pause. I want you to think about all the theories we've covered so far and how they compare and how they contrast and kind of where you find yourself fitting in so far, if at all. And where you see maybe descriptively where it seems most people are in this. And there may be a difference between what people say and how people actually behave. They may say they're an individual relativist, for instance, but then get into disagreements with other folks about the right thing to do, which again, a relativist can't do, because there is no right thing to do. It's relative to each individual, or relative to each culture. They may claim that there's some objective standard that we should all be following and adhering to, yet they remain silent when they see people who aren't behaving according to that objective standard. Silence is being complicit. I also want you to kind of go back and think again about those first few ethical dilemmas that I gave you, and be thinking about what the nihilist and the relativist, and if Plato is right, what most folks would say is the right thing to do in those situations. What would most folks say about Grandma in the Ugly Sweater? What would the nihilist say about Grandma in the Ugly Sweater? What would the individual relativist say, the cultural relativist? While again keeping in mind what you would say the right thing to do is, and why. Remember, this is a philosophy class. It's about criteria. It's about the why, much more so than it is about what the answer is, which is why I don't give you answers. And if I did, it'd just be what Shrapi believes to be true. I'm sure I have good justification for all of that, and so on and so forth. This isn't intro to Shrapi's ethics. It's an introduction to the discipline and the field of ethics itself. Okay? See you next time.